People always ask me how I stayed alive that long. They lean in like there's some secret to it, some trick. There isn't. You just stop expecting the morning to be kind, and then the morning can't disappoint you. That's the whole secret. That's all I had. My name is Ada Brennan, and for the first 21 years of my life, I belonged to a man who hated me for being born. I want to tell this the way it happened, not the way it sounds good. So let me start with the cold. We lived in a valley up in the Montana high country, past the last town the stage even bothered with. You came over a saddle of rock, and then the land dropped away into this long green crease between two ranges, and at the bottom of it sat our cabin, our barn that leaned, our 40 head of skinny cattle, and the creek that froze 9 months out of the year. In summer, it was the prettiest place God ever forgot to take back. I used to think that. The wildflowers came up purple and yellow along the water, and the elk would step out of the timber at dusk like they owned the place, which they did. It was beautiful. That's the part nobody believes, that a thing can be that beautiful and that bad at the same time. My father was named Lemuel, Lem to the few men who'd drink with him before they learned better. He was big through the shoulders, with hands that could bend a horseshoe halfway closed, and a face that had been handsome once. I've seen the wedding picture. My mother is in it, and so is a man I never met, a man who is smiling. That man died somewhere between that photograph and my first memory, and what was left wore his clothes and answered to his name, and that was all. My mother died when I was 9. Fever took her over 4 days. I remember her hand getting lighter. That's a strange thing to remember, but it's true. By the last night, her hand on mine felt like a leaf, like there was nothing holding it down anymore. After she was gone, my father didn't have anyone left to aim himself at but me. I learned the house the way an animal learns a trap. I knew which board by the stove creaked, so I didn't step there. I knew that if his coffee was cold he'd throw it, cup and all, so I kept the pot on the embers all morning, even in July. I knew the sound his boots made on the porch when the day had gone wrong for him in town, slower, heavier, dragging at the heel, and when I heard that sound I'd already be small in the corner before the door opened. I'm not going to lay it all out. Some of it isn't anyone's to look at, not even now. I'll just say that I wore long sleeves in the heat, and that I taught myself not to cry where he could hear it, because the crying made it worse. It fed something in him, and I learned to keep it behind my teeth until I could get out to the barn and let it go into the neck of the old plow horse, who never told. The horse was named Biscuit. He was the only soft thing I had. I'd press my face into his mane and he'd just stand there breathing, big and warm and patient, and I'd tell him everything, every thought I was too afraid to think out loud in the house, and he'd flick an ear back at me like he was listening. Maybe he was. I don't know what horses understand. I know that animal kept me from walking into the creek more than one winter just by being there to talk to. Here's the thing I need you to understand before the rest of it makes sense. I didn't think I was being wronged. That's what time and a hard father do to a child. They rearrange the inside of your head until cruelty feels like weather. Something that happens. Something you survive but don't argue with. I thought every house was like ours. I thought every girl had bruises she hid, and a father she watched the way you watch a dog you're not sure of. I thought this was simply what it cost to be alive, and a woman and his. It took a stranger to show me I was wrong. And the strange part, the part I still turn over at night, all these years later, is that he didn't do it on purpose. He wasn't trying to save anybody. He was just a man who'd forgotten how to look away from a thing that was wrong. His name was Garrett Moss. The first time I saw him, I didn't see a man at all. I saw a shape on the ridge. It was October, and the larch up high had gone gold, the whole mountainside burning soft and yellow against the dark of the firs. I was hauling water up from the creek, 2 buckets, the yoke biting into my shoulders, and I stopped to rest the way I always did at the flat rock, and when I looked up he was there, just sitting his horse on the saddle of the pass, still as the rocks around him, a pack horse strung out behind. He had a long gun across his saddle, and a coat made of something he'd skinned himself, And even from that far I could tell he was watching the valley the way men watch a place they've never been, taking the measure of it. I should have been afraid. A strange man up in country where help was a full day's ride away, any sensible woman would have been afraid. But I wasn't. I felt something I didn't have a name for yet. I felt like the valley had been holding its breath my whole life and somebody had finally come over the rim of it. He lifted his hand. Not a wave exactly. More like he was acknowledging that I was a person and he was a person and we'd seen each other. Then he turned his horse down the far slope, away, toward the old trapper's line that ran the high creeks, and he was gone into the timber, and I stood there with the yoke cutting my shoulders and my heart doing something it hadn't done in years. I told Biscuit about him that night, the man on the ridge with the skin coat. I didn't know I'd ever see him again. I figured he was passing through to the North Country the way men did, chasing fur or fleeing something, and I'd never know his name. But the mountains are smaller than they look, and winter was coming. He came down out of the high country 3 weeks later because the snow drove him down. That's the only reason. The early storms had shut the high passes, and the trapper's cabin he'd been squatting in had a roof that finally let go under the weight of it, and he had a string of 2 horses and a season's worth of plues and no dry place to put any of it. So he came looking for shelter, and the nearest shelter was us. I was in the yard splitting kindling when he rode in. I heard the horses first, the particular sound of shod hooves on frozen ground, and my whole body went tight the way it did at any sound I hadn't made myself. But then I saw the skin coat and I knew him, and the tightness changed into something else. My father came out onto the porch with the shotgun. He didn't point it. He just held it, the way he held everything, like a threat he hadn't decided whether to keep. "Don't get a lot of company up here," my father said. "No, sir," Garrett said. "Expect you don't." His voice was low and even, and he didn't get down off his horse. And he didn't put a hand near his own gun. He just sat there easy, letting my father look him over. "Storm caved the old Petrie cabin up the North Fork. I've got hides to keep dry and horses that need a wall to stand behind. I'll work for it. Won't be in your way. I can leave at the first break in the weather." My father looked at the pack horse and the bundles of fur on it, and I watched the arithmetic go behind his eyes. Furs meant money. A man who'd run a trap line all season had money, or would have when he hit a fort to sell. And my father never in his life turned down the smell of money. "Barn's got a tack room," he said. "Dry enough. You'll eat what we eat and you'll keep clear of my girl." That last part he said while looking straight at me, a warning to me, not to him. I dropped my eyes to the kindling like I'd been doing nothing else. "Yes, sir," Garrett said, and that was all. He put his horses up in the barn and made his bed in the tack room, and for the first few days he was as good as his word, quiet, useful, gone before light to check the few traps he set close in, back at dark, eating what I set out without complaint and without much talk. He fixed the barn door that had hung crooked for 2 years. He rechinked the cold side of the cabin where the wind came through, working at it with mud and moss until the draft stopped, and he did it without being asked and without making anything of it. He just saw a thing that was broken and put his hands to it. I watched him the way I watched everything, from the side, quick glances, then away. And he watched me back. I knew it. Not the way men sometimes watched me, which made me want to crawl out of my own skin. He watched me the way you watch a thing that doesn't add up, the way you'd look at a window that's been painted shut. It took him about a week to start asking questions I didn't know how to answer. The first one came over kindling. I was splitting it again. I split kindling like other people pray, just to have something to do with my hands, and he came over and held out his hand for the hatchet, easy, and I flinched. I didn't mean to. My body just did it. Whole body, a full step back, the hatchet up between us before I even knew I'd moved. He stopped real still, and he put his hand back down. "I wasn't going to take it from you," he said quietly. "I was going to offer to swing it a while. You've been at it an hour." A pause. but you keep it, that's fine." I didn't say anything. My face was hot. I went back to splitting and he stood there a moment longer, and then he said the thing that started everything. "Who taught you to duck like that?" Just like that, plain, not unkind, the way you'd ask who taught somebody to read. I split another piece of wood. "Nobody," I said. "That's not a thing nobody teaches," he said. And then he let it go. He walked off toward the barn and didn't push, and I stood there shaking, because no one in my whole life had ever looked straight at the thing and called it by its size. It got cold the way it only gets cold up high, a cold with teeth, a cold that makes the trees crack like gunshots in the night so you wake thinking somebody's shooting. The valley went white and stayed white. The creek froze solid enough to walk on. And in that white, closed-in world, with no town to go to and no work to take him out of the house, my father got worse. He always got worse in winter. There was nothing to fill the days but his own dark, and he poured it into the jug, and the jug poured it into me. Garrett saw more than I wanted him to. You can't hide much in a one-room cabin and a leaning barn. He saw the way I moved on the bad days. He saw one morning, when I came out to the barn with my lip split and my eye coming up purple, and I told him I'd slipped on the ice hauling water, and he looked at me for a long, quiet moment and didn't say what we both knew, which was that ice doesn't hit you square in the face and leave the rest of you fine. He just took the buckets from me, gentle this time, slow, telling me first what he was going to do, and he hauled the water himself. And from then on he hauled it every morning, and somehow he arranged it so he was between me and my father more and more without ever seeming to plan it. He'd find a reason to need my father out at the barn when I was in the house. He'd take the long jobs that kept the old man busy and tired. He was putting himself in the gap, a little at a time, like a man easing a wedge into a crack in stone. I want to be honest about something. I didn't trust it. Kindness was the most frightening thing in the world to me, because in my experience kindness was a thing men handed you right before they took something. So when Garrett was gentle, I waited for the bill to come due. I waited for him to be like my father underneath, the way I assumed all men were like my father underneath. I tested him in small mean ways I'm not proud of. I'd burn his food and watch his face. I'd give him the short answer, the cold answer, and wait for the heat to come back at me. It never did. He'd just nod and eat the burnt food and say thank you, Ada, like I'd done him a service. And slowly, God, so slowly, like ice going off the creek in spring, 1 inch a day, something in me started to unclench. We talked in the barn in the evenings where my father couldn't hear over his jug. Little things at first. He told me about the country to the north, the places he'd seen, a lake so big and so still it held 2 skis. He told me about his own people who were mostly gone, a mother dead, a brother killed in the war, a father. He spoke of the way I should have been able to speak of mine and couldn't. He'd been alone a long time. The trapping wasn't about the money, I figured out. It was about the alone. Some men go to the high country to find something. He'd gone up there to lose himself, and I think for a long time it had worked. "Why'd you come down then?" I asked him one night. Real reason, not the roof. He was oiling a trap by lantern light and he didn't look up right away. "Roof's the real reason," he said, then after a while, "but I'll tell you something true. I've been up there 3 seasons. Hadn't said 100 words to a living soul. And one morning I caught myself talking to a jay like it was going to answer, and I thought, Moss, you've gone strange. You forgot how to be a person." He set the trap down. "Man's not meant to be that alone. I know that now. Took me 3 years and a busted roof to learn it. I thought about all the years I'd talked to a horse because there was no one else. I know about that," I said. It was the truest thing I'd told anyone in a long time. He looked at me then, really looked. "Yeah," he said, "I expect you do." There was a thing growing between us in those barn evenings, and we both knew it, and neither of us touched it because it was too dangerous to touch. My father had said keep clear of my girl, and my father with a shotgun and a winter's worth of meanness in him was not a thing to gamble against. So we kept a careful distance and we talked, and the distance didn't matter, because the thing grew anyway. The way a flower will come up through a crack in a rock if you give it a season. It came to a head the week before the thaw. My father had ridden the 4 hours down to the lower town for supplies and whiskey, the first break in the weather long enough for it. He'd be gone overnight, and for the first time in my whole life, I had a day in that valley that wasn't shaped around fear. I didn't know what to do with it. That sounds simple, and it isn't. When you've spent every waking hour braced against another person and then that person is just gone, the bracing doesn't stop. Your body doesn't believe it. I kept catching myself listening for boots. I'd start at every sound. Garrett saw it, and he did the kindest thing. He didn't make me talk. He just put me to work alongside him, mending tack, and the work and his easy quiet finally let my shoulders come down from around my ears. And then I laughed. At something he said, I don't even remember what, some dry little joke about the mule. I laughed, out loud real, and I clapped my hand over my mouth the second I heard it, because laughing out loud in that house could get you hurt. Laughing said you'd forgot to be afraid. Garrett went still, and he said, careful, like he was afraid of scaring off a deer, you ought to do that more. That's a good sound. I took my hand down from my mouth. I was crying, suddenly, and laughing at the same time, that broken kind of crying that's been backed up behind a dam for years. And he didn't grab me or fix me or tell me to hush. He just sat there, an arm's length away, and let me do it. Let me come apart in front of him without flinching from the mess of it. When it passed, I told him. All of it. Everything I'd never said to a person, only to a horse. It poured out of me in the barn with the lantern guttering and the cold pressing on the walls, and he listened to every word with his jaw getting tighter and tighter, and at the end of it he said one thing. You're not going to spend another winter here. That was all, not a question. A fact, the way he'd say the river was froze or the snow was 3 feet. You're not going to spend another winter here. And I understood that something had shifted, that this quiet man had decided a thing, and that the deciding of it was as solid as the mountains. He'll come after us, I said. You don't know him. He won't let a thing go that he thinks is his. He'd track us 100 miles to make a point. Then he'll find me standing in front of you, Garrett said, and that'll be a different kind of day than he's used to. My father came back the next afternoon, and he came back drunk and mean, the trip having gone sour somehow as his trips always did. And whatever plan Garrett and I had half made in the barn, leave at the thaw, go quiet, go far, the day got ahead of all of it. I'll tell you exactly how it happened, because I've gone over it 10,000 times, and the order of it matters to me. My father came in already ugly. The whiskey was on him and the cold was on him, and he was looking for the thing he always looked for, which was somewhere to put it. I had supper on. I'd done everything right. I'd kept the coffee hot and the floor swept, and I'd stayed small, but there's no doing it right with a man like that. There never was. The doing it right was a story I told myself to feel like I had a hand on the wheel. He found his reason. The biscuits were burned at the edges. They weren't really, but he said they were, and that was the same thing. He stood up from the table and the chair went over backward, and I knew the sound of that. I knew exactly the shape of what came next, and my whole body went into the old place, the small place, the corner. He had me by the hair before I got there. And then the door opened. Garrett had been at the barn. He told me later he'd had a feeling all afternoon, an itch, the kind a man who's lived in dangerous country learns not to ignore, and he'd been finding reasons to stay close to the house. He came through that door and he took it all in, my father's fist in my hair, my face, the overturned chair, and I watched something settle over him that I'd never seen on a man before. Not rage. Rage is hot and loud. This was the opposite. This was a terrible quiet, a stillness, like the air before the worst kind of weather. Let her go, Brennan. My father turned, surprised, still holding me. This is my house, he said. My girl, you'll keep clear like I told you, or you'll. She's not yours, Garrett said. She's not anybody's, and you've got about 2 seconds to take your hand out of her hair before I take it out for you. My father laughed. He actually laughed because no one had stood up to him in so long that he'd forgotten it was possible, and he reached for the shotgun by the door. He never got it. I won't make it sound like more than it was. There was no long fight. Men who have spent their meanness on people who can't fight back are usually soft underneath it, and my father, for all his size, had never in his life faced a man who wasn't afraid of him. Garrett crossed the room before my father's hand closed on the gun. He put my father on the floor and he kept him there, a knee in his back, the old man bucking and roaring and then, slowly, going still, because he understood, for maybe the first time in his life he understood, that he'd met something harder than himself. Garrett didn't beat him. I want that known. He could have. God knows I'd have understood it. He just held him down, breathing hard until the fight ran out of the old man, and then he said, low, right into my father's ear, "We're leaving. Tonight. You're going to lie there and you're going to let us. And if you ever come looking, if I ever see your face on a trail or a street or a ridgeline for the rest of my natural life, there won't be a conversation. You understand me?" My father didn't answer, but he understood. I saw it in him. I saw the thing in him that ran the whole show, the certainty that he could do as he pleased. I watched it break, right there on the floor of that cabin, and I felt nothing about it. Not triumph, not even fear. Just a kind of vast flat quiet like a field after the snows finally stopped. We left within the hour. I took almost nothing. A few things of my mother's, her thimble, a comb, the wedding picture I cut out of its frame. I took my coat and the warmest of what I had. And I took Biscuit because there was no power in heaven or earth that was going to make me leave that horse behind, and Garrett didn't argue. He just helped me get the old gelding saddled and led him out into the dark. The thaw had loosened the lower passes. We rode out of that valley by moonlight, the snow blue and the trees black and the cold so sharp it felt clean. I kept waiting to feel afraid. I kept waiting to hear hooves behind us. But there was nothing back there but the dark and the valley getting smaller, and somewhere in the second hour of riding, I understood that I wasn't going back, that I was never going back, that the worst thing that had ever happened to me was behind me now and getting farther behind with every step of the horse. I cried for a while in the saddle, quiet. Garrett rode beside me and didn't say anything and didn't try to stop it. He just rode close, so our stirrups near touched, so I'd know he was there. We made the lower town by dawn, and we kept going. I'm going to skip the long part, the months it took to get somewhere safe and start something. It wasn't all easy. I want to be truthful, I didn't just step out of that cabin healed. For a long time I still ducked at sudden movement. For a long time I couldn't sleep unless I could see the door. I'd wake in the night with my heart going, and I'd have to feel for Garrett breathing beside me to remember where I was and that I was free. Some of that never fully left. The body keeps its own accounts. But it got quieter year by year, the way the worst cold finally goes off the creek. We settled eventually in a green country far from those mountains, a farm, low and warm, with cottonwoods along a slow river and good soil, and no neighbors close enough to fear. Garrett gave up the trapping. He said he was done being alone, and he meant it. We were married by a circuit preacher under one of those cottonwoods the next spring, and I wore a dress with short sleeves for the first time in my adult life, because there was nothing on my arms any more I needed to hide, and the sun on my bare arms that day is a thing I will feel until I die. Biscuit lived 11 more years. He died old and fat in a green pasture, which is the most I ever wanted for him, the most I wanted for any of us, to die old and fat and unafraid in a green place in the sun. I had children. I want to say that plainly because it's the part that means the most and it's the hardest to say. I had children, and I raised them in a house where no one was ever afraid, and they grew up not knowing the sound a body makes when it ducks, not knowing which board by the stove creaks, not knowing any of it, and I watched them not know it, and I thought every single day, that's the whole point. That's everything. They get to not know. People ask me how I stayed alive that long in that valley with that man. I told you at the start there's no secret to it. You just stop expecting the morning to be kind. But here's the thing I've learned, the thing I'd want anyone in a dark valley to hear if they could hear me. You can spend your whole life believing that cruelty is just weather, something that happens, something you survive but don't argue with. And you can be wrong about that. You can be wrong your whole life and not know it. Until one day a stranger comes over the rim of your valley, and he looks at the thing you've stopped seeing, and he calls it by its size. That's all it took, one man who'd forgotten how to look away. I was 21 years old before someone told me the morning could be kind. I'm an old woman now, and I've had a great many kind mornings since, more than I can count, and I have wanted for nothing, but I have never once stopped being grateful for them. Not one, because I remember every one of the other kind. And that, I think, is the only thing the bad years were ever good for. They taught me exactly what a kind morning is worth. It's worth everything. It's worth riding out into the cold dark with nothing but a horse and a stranger and a hope. It's worth all of it. I'd do it again tomorrow. I'd do it 1,000 times.